1. The Phantom of Route 17. It was 1979 when truck drivers first reported seeing her, a ghostly figure on Route 17, a desolate highway cutting through rural Alabama. The road is infamous for accidents, especially at night, with its winding turns and unlit stretches. Some call it the Death Road. Jason, a long-haul trucker, shared his encounter decades later. He was driving through Route 17 around 3 a.m., his headlights piercing the dense fog that blanketed the road. In the distance, he saw someone standing on the shoulder, a woman in a long white dress. Her figure was barely visible through the mist, but Jason slowed his truck anyway. He assumed she was stranded. As he got closer, his headlights illuminated her face, or what should have been her face. Instead, he saw nothing but a black void, an empty shadow where features should be. Jason slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop, but when he looked back, she was gone. Shaken, he continued down the road, only to see her again a mile later, standing perfectly still. This time, she was in the center of the lane, staring him down. Jason swerved, narrowly avoiding her, his truck fishtailing before he regained control. He didn't stop driving until sunrise, pulling into the nearest diner to gather his wits. An older man overheard his story and nodded grimly. "You've seen her, haven't you? The Phantom Bride." Locals believe the woman was a bride-to-be who died in a car crash on Route 17 in the 1950s. Legend says she walks the road, searching for the driver who caused her death. If you stop for her, or worse, if you let her into your vehicle, she'll ride with you forever. Years later, Jason still avoids Route 17. He swears that night, when he swerved to avoid her, he saw her smile, as if she knew he'd be back. 2. The Cursed Asylum of New England. In the forests of Connecticut, hidden by overgrowth and forgotten by time, lies the abandoned Willowbrook Asylum. Built in the 1920s, it housed patients with severe mental illness. At least that's what history says. But locals tell a darker story. They believe the asylum was a front for experiments on the human mind, led by a doctor obsessed with unlocking the secrets of consciousness. 3 years ago, a group of urban explorers dared to venture into Willowbrook, hoping to capture footage of its infamous haunted halls. Among them was Alex, who later uploaded the footage, minus the final 20 minutes. Here's why. The group entered at dusk, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Graffiti covered the peeling walls, and the smell of mildew lingered in the air. They walked the narrow halls, pausing at empty rooms filled with rusted beds and old restraints. But as they reached the basement, they heard something, a low, rhythmic tapping echoing from the end of the corridor. Alex led the group forward, their cameras rolling, until they found the source. In a small, windowless room sat an old wheelchair, its wheels rocking slowly back and forth as if someone unseen was pushing it. The tapping grew louder, vibrating through the walls. Then the whispering began. Voices, dozens of them, seemed to pour out of the walls, all speaking at once. Words like "help me," "he's coming," and "leave" rose to a deafening chorus. The explorers ran, but Alex turned back for one final shot. He captured a figure standing in the hallway, a tall man in a white doctor's coat, his face obscured by darkness. In his hand, he held an old leather bag, the kind doctors once carried. The whisper stopped, replaced by a chilling, distorted voice. "You shouldn't be here." Alex dropped the camera and fled. When he reviewed the footage later, the final frame showed the doctor staring into the camera, his eyes glowing red. Locals say the doctor is still there, experimenting on anyone who dares enter. Willowbrook remains abandoned, but sometimes on quiet nights, people claim they hear whispers drifting from the forest, calling them back. 3. The Black-Eyed Boy of Montana. In the small, isolated town of Elkhorn, Montana, nestled deep within the valley of jagged peaks and dense pine forests, there was an old farmhouse that locals avoided. It sat on the edge of sprawling fields, its creaking wood exterior and cracked windows silently warning those who approached. Overgrown weeds surrounded the property like claws reaching out from the earth. It had been abandoned for decades, but people whispered of the boy, the black-eyed boy, a spirit said to appear to those who were unlucky enough to cross his path. In 1995, the Thompson family, David, Sarah, and their 7-year-old daughter Emily, moved into the farmhouse, eager for a fresh start away from city life. The property had been dirt cheap, and they chalked the eerie reputation up to small-town superstition. The first few days were peaceful. Emily explored the fields, running between tall grass while David and Sarah worked to fix up the creaking floors and peeling walls. It was on the 4th day that Emily first mentioned the boy. At dinner, she spoke casually, poking at her mashed potatoes. "The boy in the field says it's going to rain tomorrow." Sarah paused. "What boy, sweetheart?" Emily looked up, smiling innocently. "The one with the dark eyes." David and Sarah exchanged a glance, but Sarah brushed it off. "You made a friend already?" "Huh? What's his name?" Emily shrugged. "He doesn't have one." Over the next few days, Emily spent more and more time outside. She'd stand in the tall grass, staring toward the edge of the woods. Sarah would call her back, and Emily would return quietly, almost reluctantly. One night, as Sarah was tucking Emily into bed, she noticed something odd. Muddy footprints, small, bare footprints, streaked across the wooden floor of Emily's room. "Emily, where did these come from?" Sarah asked. Emily turned on her side, facing the wall. "He comes inside sometimes." Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Who does?" Emily's voice was soft, almost inaudible. "The boy." The knocking. Later that week, David woke to a sound that didn't belong. The faint, rhythmic knock, knock, knock at the front door. It was just past midnight, and the house was silent aside from the creaking of old wood. Confused, David got up and peered through the peephole. On the porch, illuminated faintly by the moonlight, stood a young boy. He looked to be around Emily's age, wearing old, tattered clothes that didn't seem right for the 90s. More like something a child might have worn in the 1800s. "Hey, kid," David called through the door. "What are you doing out here this late?" The boy didn't move. Slowly, his head tilted upward, and David's breath caught in his throat. The boy's face was pale, his skin almost translucent, and his eyes, they were solid black. No whites, no pupils, just endless, empty darkness. "Let me in," the boy said in a monotone voice. "I'm cold." David stumbled back from the door, heart pounding. He locked the deadbolt and grabbed a flashlight, rushing back to the bedroom where Sarah was still asleep. The knocking continued, slow at first but growing louder, more urgent. "Knock, knock, knock." Then it stopped. David waited, flashlight in hand, but the only sound was the wind outside. When he worked up the nerve to look out the window, the boy was gone, but muddy footprints led from the porch into the fields, disappearing at the tree line. The final night in the farmhouse was the most terrifying. At exactly midnight, the knocking returned, this time at every door and window. The sound echoed through the house like a drumbeat, growing louder and faster, as though a dozen hands were pounding to be let inside. David grabbed a baseball bat and crept through the house, his flashlight shaking in his grip. He saw shadowy figures standing outside every window, small, childlike shapes, all with empty black eyes. They were watching. Sarah screamed from upstairs. David rushed to Emily's room and froze. The window was wide open, and Emily was gone. Sarah was leaning out the window, screaming her daughter's name into the dark. David ran outside, his flashlight cutting through the fields. In the distance, near the tree line, he saw her, Emily, standing next to the boy. The boy turned to face David, and even from that distance, David could see those black, hollow eyes. Emily took the boy's hand, and they disappeared into the woods. The Thompsons searched the property for hours, but Emily was gone. The police investigated, but found no trace of her. In the basement, however, they discovered something chilling, a small, unmarked grave. Buried inside were the remains of a child. The bones were decades old, and the cause of death was never determined. The legend continues. The Thompsons left Elkhorn, broken and grief-stricken. To this day, locals say the boy still haunts the farmhouse and its fields, waiting for someone to let him in. Some claim they've seen a young girl in white wandering near the woods, her eyes as black as night. They say once you see the black-eyed boy, you're never truly free. And if you hear that midnight knocking, whatever you do, don't open the door.